did.
The smoke column rotated with a shift in wind and began funneling down the canyon directly towards Johnson and his crew. After trying one more time to contact the packer by radio, the crew was about to leave the ridge when they saw the 14-year-old boy come back down the trail. He had only 2 of his original 5 mules in tow. A spot fire erupted about 100 yards down the canyon from them, and Johnson told his assistant and the crew to get headed back down the trail. He and one of the locals were going to stay behind to wait and see if the other packer was coming. A few moments later, the other packer appeared riding quickly with 7 mules, some of them tethered together and some of them loose. Johnson yelled to the crew members below to clear the way.
As the mules passed, they began to panic, spreading into the woods, going every direction. We were spread out at this time, and what ensued was utter chaos. There was mules going every direction, crew members chasing mules, and a packer screaming obscenities at the top of his lungs. During this incident that we've referred to as the rodeo, the fire continued to progress towards us. And in the confusion, one of the detail crew members split off, crossed the river, and nobody saw her do this. Once the mules passed, we knew we didn't have a lot of time. We were spread out, and there was a lot of distance in between us. We all began to sprint down the trail and cross the river. We could hear the fire right on our heels, the wind was howling, and there was the noise of the crown fire coming up behind us. We knew that we had to get across the river and either go up Anderson Creek or seek shelter. So we crossed Anderson Creek and came to what we determined to be a survivable deployment site. We did a quick head count, realized that we were missing 1 crew member. This was the hardest feeling that I've ever had to deal with in my entire career. There wasn't time to go back out and look, so we had a very quick conversation about whether to continue up Anderson Creek or deploy there. The local told us there was only thicker timber up Anderson Creek. So we decided that we were going to deploy there. This was our best option for survival. We're shaking out our shelters and the wind was fierce. The rock buffered us from a lot of that wind. But as I was shaking out my shelter, I remember hearing trees snapping off and actually saw trees up to 8 inches in diameter snap off near our deployment site. It was pretty hasty. We probably had 1 to 2 minutes at the most before the fire front hit us.
The fire front passed between the Gray Bull River and the deployment site. After about 5 minutes, the crew realized they still had some clean air and emerged from their shelters. As Johnson continued trying to contact the missing crew member on the radio, a couple of others grabbed some fusees and began to burn out along the west side of the site to increase the safety area. Others dug out a better deployment site and reorganized the shelters in a tight group, placing those with rips and tears in the middle. Meanwhile, spot fires were igniting and rapidly growing in intensity up Anderson Creek. As the fire grew closer and more severe, it forced the crew back into their shelters.
The noise was deafening. We were all having to yell in order to communicate, even though we were only feet apart. The biggest surprise to me was that the amount of embers falling out. It sounded like it was hailing on top of the shelter. There were big chunks of material as big as baseballs coming down on our shelters. Sometimes you'd have to reach back and knock these off with your hand. Several of the shelters had substantial rips in them. Even at one point, one of these rips ignited. The crew member was able to take his hand and put the ignited rip out. But these rips definitely compromised the seal that they had with the ground, and they were exposed to extra amounts of smoke. Once we knew the majority of the heat blasts were down, I began to worry about snags falling onto our location. I began to lift up the seam of my shelter to see if I could see out. Each time I did, a huge blast of hot air and smoke would come inside the shelter, and I'd have to reseal it quickly. It took me several tries before I was able to see out and realize that we're in no immediate danger from the snags. After 45 minutes, we emerged from our fire shelters. Here's a quick video clip taken within minutes of us coming from out of the fire shelters. There's a lot of snags falling, and we heard a couple of major rock slides and decided our best protection was to lay against the rock wall.
Anderson Creek deployment area, the Little Venus fire, Shoei National Forest, Wyoming. In sight, everybody here survives okay. Minimal injuries. Fire went down the canyon, came up all around us, lit a backfire over here to help us out a little bit. Came all the way around, burned out down towards the drainage. So it's 17:23. I'm talking to with all of Unit except one crew member. We went in our shelters around 16:20. The fire blew up around, I got video of it, around 15:50 something. Proceeded to chase us down the valley. We ran down the drainage, crossed the drainage, found a overlook, which I'm pointing at right now. This is the overlook we used. This is the deployment site. 9 of us deployed here, 9 of us survived.
Although Johnson had made repeated attempts to contact the missing crew member and the incident command post, none had been successful. When the crew exited their shelters, they still had no idea where the missing crew member was and wondered if she'd made it down the trail with the Packers or if she'd deployed her shelter somewhere else. After some period of time and many attempts passed, they finally established contact with the outside world. However, as this clip illustrates, communication problems continued. This is just a short segment of what was a difficult conversation that lasted longer than 20 minutes.
ICP, we need someone at the Jack Creek Trailhead. Find out how many is with the Packers. Could you say that one more time? You're breaking up really bad. We couldn't pick you up. Yeah, you're still broken up. ICP, he's asking how many people were with the Packer at the Jack Creek Trailhead. Just ask those people how many people were with the Packer. There was 10 people. Tell them that we've had a shelter deployment at the trailhead to count the number of people there. They've had shelter deployment at the Jack Creek Trailhead. They need to know how many people are there. No, shelter deployment in Anderson Creek. Find out how many people are at Jack Creek. Could you please repeat? You're real sketchy, but I heard that you're asking how many people are at Jack Creek Trailhead. Could you please repeat? We're 10 people at Jack Creek Trailhead. Shelter deployment in Anderson. We need to know how many people made it to Jack Creek Trailhead. Number unaccounted for. Copy. There were 10 people at Jack Creek Trailhead.
That radio conversation really sums up the frustration we had trying to get out that entire day. There was a lot of confusion in terms of where the deployment had occurred and the conditions of the folks. We're finally able to relay out that we needed to get a helicopter up to help search for the missing crew member. Additionally, we got Flight for Life started this way since we had no idea of the condition of the missing crew member. As the helicopters came in closer, we were able to start talking to them on air to ground. During this conversation, the missing crew member's voice came across the air to ground frequency. We all let out a huge scream of relief. I can always remember how terrific that felt to hear her voice come across the radio. This slide here shows the island where the crew member that split off from the rest of us deployed her fire shelter. She had tremendous strength and courage to face this challenge alone. She was deployed for over an hour at this site and was buffeted by high winds. She had a newer fire shelter, and even with the flaps on the floors, she was physically sore from having to hold down her shelter during the high winds in her deployment. Within an hour, the smoke began to clear around the site. We were able to venture out and find the missing crew member, and all 10 of us had gathered back at the deployment site. We were also very worried about the Packers. We didn't know what their fate had become. We were able to radio out during this time and found that they had made it back to the trailhead with the fire chasing them the entire way. We knew the helicopters weren't going to be able to get in and find us. We also knew that we didn't want to spend the night in there. We were running low on water, and we knew that the only way we were going to get out that night was to walk on our own.
Using a system of lookouts, the crew carefully made its way back to the trailhead, where they were each given oxygen and treated by medical personnel who were waiting for them. Fortunately, they had survived the day with only injuries being a couple of small burns, the largest about the size of a silver dollar. All were suffering from severe smoke inhalation and associated headache. This incident, like most others, was not the result of one condition, one decision, or one action. A number of factors contributed to this near-fatal incident. Poor or no communications with overhead and adjoining forces. The late start of the hike in. Not being able to see the fire and not being in contact with anyone who could. Packers with no PPE or radio. Shelters with rips and tears. Crew members getting separated. While a number of things went wrong that day at the Little Venus fire, there also were things that went right. Most notably, the fire shelters again proved their worth many times over, and everyone survived. A report of the peer review conducted in the days following the deployment can be found on the Lessons Learned website. It's important to remember these incidents, though tragic, can serve as valuable learning tools. They provide us the opportunity to analyze what went wrong as well as what went right, what could have been prevented, and how we can be more alert to the fact that a series of actions or events may lead to a serious incident.
Now, hindsight's always 20/20. Yes, I would have done some stuff different that day. My big goal of this presentation is to hopefully someday people will learn from it, and it'll help keep some firefighters somewhere from having to pull that fire shelter and lay face down in the dirt waiting for the unknown.